Today I have something of a vanity project for you all. I'm going to walk you through how to make a font face with your own handwriting. And I've never done this before, but I've had friends who have done it, and I've been interested in fonts for a while. I thought this would be a fun way to try making my own font. So to start, I went to this site called Calligrapher. They have pretty good SEO, so they show up if you search for how to make your own font. And Calligrapher is cool because the basic workflow is that you print out a template and then you write a bunch of characters on it, and if you are printing it out on paper, then you can scan it and it will let you just write with it like a marker or a pen. But we already have an iPad, so I filled it out on an iPad and the result was really crisp. So I'm going to walk you through the basic workflow of Calligrapher, and then you might find that it doesn't quite look like your handwriting, and then we're going to post-process the font with FontForge. So to get started on Calligrapher, you go to this templates page, and I'll note that you can use Calligrapher for free. If you pay, you get some extra options like advanced ligatures, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But you can use it for free if you want to give it a try. This is not sponsored or anything. It's just a site that I tried out. I like the way it works. So if you go to templates, this is where you can select the characters you want to include in your font. So to get started, I think the free one allows you to have something like 67 characters. I can't quite remember. So that would be like the minimal English characters. There's also other things in here like basic math characters, punctuation, currencies, and then ligatures, which are combinations of characters that you might write differently than those characters by themselves. So you compose your template by selecting what characters you want in your font. Here we have, let's try basic English. Okay, so as you click these, it adds more things to your template. This is a huge character set. I can remove all these, and the minimal English set is pretty small. It takes longer than you might think to write these out, so choose a minimal set, and you can always add more later. So you choose the characters you want, and then you say download template. And this will give you a PDF or PNG with help lines if you want them, which I would recommend. And then you write on this template. And like I said, I used an iPad. So let's take a look. I have the templates downloaded. This is a pretty cool design. So here's an example template. It has a QR code that shows Calligrapher what you're submitting and some centering marks. And then each character goes in one of these boxes. And these lines presumably are for the baseline, the descender cap, the ascender cap, and then the X height. So these are common font metrics that you might want to pay attention to. You can always adjust the spacing of these characters later, so it doesn't have to be perfect. I tend to write my letters well above the baseline. So if you want them to be really lined up on the first try, make sure you've really lined them up on this baseline. You can see here, I think this is the minimal set of English characters. This is the first one I filled out. So you can print it out and fill it out with a marker. It's good to use kind of a thicker pen or marker because the scan will pick it up better. If you want to do it on an iPad, I used an iPad to do this with the Apple Pencil, and the result was ultra clean because you're just giving it a perfect PDF. So here's an example template, and let's look at one I filled out. You'll notice my handwriting is a little bit messy, and you can see the characters going above the baseline here. So when you actually write these side by side, it's easier to get them lined up, and if you're writing them in these cells, they'll sort of float above the baseline, and these look super awkward, and I wasn't sure where the quotes and apostrophe should go. One thing I'll ding Calligrapher for right here is that the font they're using to indicate what character you're supposed to write in the cell doesn't really distinguish between certain common characters. So it's easy to tell what letter forms, in the basic English set, but let's look, for example, at, these are all different versions of basic English. I'll tell you why I did it multiple times in a second. Let's look at a template that has even more stuff, like this one called More Cares. Okay, so here's an example of a template with even more characters in it, and you'll encounter characters like this one, presumably it's a hyphen. And then if you scroll down, this one, an underscore, these start to look pretty similar. Here's a backtick, a tilde, a split vertical pipe, and a solid one. And then some things like, is this an overline? Maybe it's a dash. I think it's probably an overline. it gets kind of hard to tell. So I would appreciate if they had used a different font that distinguishes these characters a little bit better, maybe a programming font. You can see this one has a bunch of different accent marks over the different characters. Let's see another example of some punctuation. Okay, here's where the punctuation gets even more ambiguous. We have, is this another overline? I'm not sure. Maybe this is a bar to go over a character as a combining form. This looks like a combining dot. And I just kind of guessed for some of these. And again, I'm not going to use most of these in my font, but the purpose of this font will be to take notes that sort of look like my handwriting. Especially, I'm going to try to use it on my website. So I really only need the basic English set and maybe a math set, and this is just to see if it'll look good as an experiment. The ellipsis is helpful. This one's a good ligature to have in here. And we have another dot. I don't know how this one's different. It would have been helpful for them to tell us the names of the characters here, like the Unicode character name. Okay, so that's what the templates look like. Again, it takes a while to fill these out, even if you're using an iPad. And there's a stray mark here, which it cleaned up nicely. So once you're done filling out the template, you upload them so you go here to My Fonts. You can create a new font if you haven't made one, and then you say Upload Template. And the reason I filled out the basic template multiple times is because Calligrapher lets you do multiple variants of the same character. So here I have a bunch of variants of the quotes. And if you use the same if you have one variant of each character, your writing will look really repetitive. It doesn't really look like handwriting. So these variants of the character allow it to look more realistic. And the way Calligrapher is implementing that behind the scenes is with Contextual Alternatives, which means that it substitutes the character glyph in differently depending on the characters that surround it. So depending on what word this capital K, for example, appears in, the capital K that it chooses to render will be different. And we'll explore that a little more in FontForge. So you upload your templates, and then you're really only just starting, because I'll show you what it looks like if we were to just upload it naively. So I'm going to make a new font because I don't want to mess this one up, called Test Font. And let's just leave all the things at their defaults. And I'm going to upload the same template that I showed you before. So let's go to, let's see, Calligrapher, and then I'll show you the More Characters template that I filled out because it has a good selection. The real power of this template upload seems to be if you want to fill it out on a piece of paper. For filling it out on an iPad, there are other apps that directly capture your handwriting as vectors, but I'm not sure if they allow you to do contextual alternative characters. So that's one of the features I was really looking for, and Calligrapher provides that. That's one of the reasons I decided to try it out. Okay, so here's the result from the scan. It found 398 glyphs, and I'm just going to go ahead and add them all. You can delete the ones in there that you don't like if you have some that you messed up on. Okay, so we have one variant of each character. I'm going to say build font right away, and we're not going to change anything yet. We'll just see what it looks like. And spoiler, it's going to look pretty bad because the characters aren't aligned with the baseline very well. I'm not that good at aligning them when I'm writing by hand, and the spacing is probably going to be quite off. So y'all haven't seen my handwriting before, but if we make this a little bit bigger, it probably doesn't look very natural. You'll see a G descending below the bounding box of the character. The word spacing is very close to the character spacing, so this kind of looks like a big string of letters and not a group of words in a sentence. And if we make it a little smaller to see more text, we'll see some things that look pretty awkward, like the gap between this F and O is really large. And so that's where we'll start to care about ligatures, which are combinations of characters that look different from those characters naively combined as here. So this looks a little wonky, and your handwriting, at this point you might be happy with it, depending on what you want to do with it. This doesn't look quite realistic enough for me, and I wanted to see how close I could get. Things like this O being very different size from the H are artifacts of writing the characters by themselves in different boxes and not knowing what the lines really mean. So let's look at how we can fix that. And first, before we do that, I want to talk about the contextual alternatives that I mentioned earlier. So we can go ahead and upload another template here. And I'll just upload the basic English set, just one copy of that one. I wrote it out a bunch of times because I wanted a good number of variants of the core Latin characters. This is much smaller than that more characters template that I made. Okay, let's add these to the font. And now you'll start to see the power of these contextual substitutions. If we build the font again, I would love if Calligrapher provided a faster debugging loop than modifying the characters and rebuilding the font each time. It's probably a technical limitation that you have to rebuild the font, but it's a little bit of a slow workflow. Okay, so let's test, see if we can get the characters to sub in differently based on their context. So here I'm starting to write the word test, and then I'll write testing, and you can see that the I there changed as soon as I added an N. It seems like Calligrapher does this by measuring the characters after the letter that you're currently writing. So I'm not exactly sure if from what I can tell, the prefix doesn't matter, and just you'll see the same ing form regardless of what the prefix is. So this is already really cool that we have a few variants of each font, of each character. It makes it look more handwritten. Humans are really good at spotting repetitive patterns, and if I keep writing this, you can see we might want even more variants of each character, perhaps 3, just depending on how many characters you expect to be repeated in a row, because it's pretty obvious that these Fs are the same, and then this one is the odd one out. But that's a hint of sort of previewing how these contextual alternatives work. Okay, so now it's time to adjust the metrics. So the first thing we want to fix is that the word spacing was too small and the letters were really far apart, which looks pretty awkward. So I'm going to edit the font details here. I do appreciate that it kept this simple, but we're going to want more power than this eventually. Let's just crank this letter spacing down a lot, like maybe 50%. And you can play with this to see what looks good with your handwriting. And then I'm going to increase the word spacing a little. I have no idea what units these are in, or like these are percentages. The word spacing doesn't even indicate what the number is right now, so that's a little bit mysterious. I would have appreciated some feedback here, like saying it'll be in points or percentage of the character width or something like that. Okay, let's take a look. So already I think the letter spacing looks a little bit better. You can see words like secret is nicely compact, and then the space between the words looks pretty good. So this is looking a little bit more like my handwriting. The baseline variations here are still really wonky. Like this word is sort of wavy up and down. When I'm writing on a piece of paper, it doesn't usually look like that unless I've had a ton of coffee. So this is probably because I'm writing the letters in different boxes that aren't near each other, and it's really hard to get my bearings when I'm writing them in those boxes. So let's take a look at this H and O and see if we can fix them. So this view of all the characters lets you adjust them individually. And we can see already this H looks like it's floating. So I'm going to say adjust baseline and size. And if your font has a lot of glyphs in it, it takes a really long time for this screen to load. This is another thing I'll ding Calligrapher for. I would love it if they could cache these letter forms somehow so that this loads faster. I think on the subsequent loads it's a little bit better, but you can see it takes a long time. So this H is floating above the baseline. I kind of want all these characters, like this A, to be sitting on this line. So I can move it up and down with the arrow keys or using the buttons in the interface. And I would love to be able to click on a neighboring character and edit it. Oh, it works. Wow, I did not know when I was doing this the first time. So a few brownie points here that you can click on characters that look awkward and fix them. This is actually a huge time savings. Okay, Another thing that's a little bit awkward here is that these characters are out of context in how we would really see them in a sentence. We can shuffle them, but it would be really nice to see them in the context of a word in the target language, because I'm probably not going to see, for example, this footnote indicator in the middle of a numerical string or something like that. So the shuffle button gets a little nonsensical. You can use the left and right arrows to scoot this character over, try to find another character that it'll be neighboring in a real sentence, maybe like an A. But this is a little frustrating. I would love to be able to type test phrases in here so that we could see it against real text like lorem ipsum or something. Okay, so you can edit the baseline of each character. And if we go back to the font and rebuild it, again, this is pretty slow to see the results of our work. Okay, so we were looking at however before, I think. That was one of the words. And it still looks a little awkward. This H is still floating. This might be the H we didn't yet adjust with its contextual alternatives. This one's floating as well. So it needs some tweaking, and this part takes a long time. I was working on it for several hours through this web interface, trying to get the letter forms lined up with the baseline correctly. Actually, let's take another look real quick. And I want to talk about one other thing before we jump into FontForge. Okay, so we can type custom text in here. I was doing that to test, for example, you can type the quick brown fox, some classic Latin-like phrases, things like that. So it's useful to try, if you have phrases you want to look really good, you can sort of test them out here. But the loop between typing them here and going back to the character editor and fixing them is a little bit long. So another thing we want to look at here is the spacing between the characters. And let's choose a character that I think might be awkward, like J. And we'll see if, like, let's type a word, some combination of characters like T followed by J, F followed by J, O followed by J. So these actually don't look too bad, but the J stands off from the neighbor character quite a lot. And there are two ways you can approach this. One is if it's a common combination of letters, you can make a ligature for it. I don't think I have any ligatures in this font yet, so another option is to adjust the spacing of the character if it's particularly narrow. By default, Calligrapher uses the bounding box of the character as its width, and for a character like J, if it has a descender that hooks to the side, we might actually want to pretend it's a little bit narrower so that it tucks next to its neighbor. So I'm going to go into the J, and this is something you have to pay for, but you can say adjust spacing if you have the pro version of the app, and I'm just going to move this line over. So here I would love to see neighboring characters to see how this is going to affect the font, but unfortunately the screen's a little bit limited. I can only see one character at a time, and so we have to kind of guess. Let's say it'll be about here, and I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm not a font design expert. I've never made a font before. This is all just playing around with it until it looks right and taking artistic license. So you may be cringing if you've done this before and you know the rules of thumb about how wide a J should be, but this is just a noob trying it out. Okay, let's try it again and see if it made any difference. I'm going to bump up the size here so we can see it. And let's type OJ. So see how now the J actually goes, the descender of the J comes under the O. That's what we wanted to see. I'm going to make it way bigger. The J is actually extending past its listed width, which means that it'll tuck under neighboring characters. So the T and the J, even though this is not a common ligature, TI is, and this is still not good enough. Normally we would hope the I would tuck under the crossbar, the top bar of the neighboring character, and it's not doing that yet. So we don't want to make the I too narrow though, because if there are two I's in a row, or the I is after a J or something like that, we don't want the I to be on top of the neighboring character. So in order to address these specific pair spacing issues, we'll have to make some ligatures. So I'll show you what the template looks like for ligatures. I think I have it in miscellaneous here. Let's see what this template looks like. I just named these when I downloaded them. So this one looks like it doesn't have ligatures in it. Let's see, what am I missing? Did more characters actually have ligatures? We can search it for. These apparently aren't searchable. Let's just take a look real quick. This doesn't look like it has any in it. So I might have buried them in one of these helpfully named numbered versions. Not that one. Not that one. So you might want to name these a little bit better if you plan to revisit them for uploading to other fonts or editing them in detail. I wonder if I left it somewhere else in my messy downloads folder. Doesn't look like it. So suffice it to say, there is a ligature template that you can edit. It'll have you write character combinations like FI. Oh, here it is in miscellaneous. Okay. So there was a blank here. I thought this was the last page. So we have AN, CH, ON. These are some common sort of different combinations of characters in English and other Latin family languages. ATIO. You can sort of see how these will be composed into bigger words, like moment for MENT, something like that. Double N is a common one. Double S. You'll probably see double F in here. Double T. So depending on your handwriting, these might look significantly different from the characters when they're separate, or they might just look like two characters that's slightly closer together or something like that. So let's upload this miscellaneous template to the font and see how that changes what it looks like. I'm not sure what that checkbox that says automatically clean templates does. I imagine it applies some kind of denoising filter, but this template is pristine because it came straight out of the iPad. So hopefully it has no effect on these characters. And it actually seems like it's creating vector characters, which is pretty cool. At first I thought it was going to use bitmaps of each one because it's from a scan, but I think it's actually tracing the bitmaps. So we're going to add characters, and when you say create variants, that means if there's a duplicate of a character, you want it to become an alternative. Okay, let's see what happens. Build the font. The more characters you add, the longer this takes, and it can start taking quite a long time. Okay, so we already see some evidence of the ligatures. Like, look at this word effect with the double F. I ended up throwing away that ligature because I don't actually write that way. When I was pressed to write a ligature in the box, that's what I thought it might look like, but I'm usually messier than that. I just write the two F's close together. But we can see some other ones. For example, soothing, the ing is a ligature. Let's just take a look at it. Test ing. So you can see in starting out badly, the spacing here is really wide. When I add the G, suddenly everything compacts. And we can also see a problem with this. This ligature ing is too small. It's just, I wrote it at a different time. I think it was the second day of working on this, and I was writing smaller that day. So make sure you write these all in the same sitting when you're in the same mood. You might want to warm up first. You'll probably get better alignment on the first try. And this is good enough. I can scale it up a little, but it still looks a little awkward. And let's take a look at some other ligatures like SCH. You can see when I write, my letters it's almost cursive, which is, I think, common of handwriting, even if it's print. And so when the letters are spaced out, like these naively spaced ones, it looks pretty mechanical. And when we introduce the ligature, it can look good, but only if the other characters in the word also have the same spacing. Otherwise, it looks really awkward, because this looks like handwriting, and then these are just kind of pasted on like a ransom note. So we're going to need to, I spent a lot of time, like I said, in Calligrapher fixing these spacings. And let's take a look at that font now. So it's called Travis Print 1 because it was my first attempt at a print font for my handwriting. And my name's Travis. Okay, let's build this font. And this one has a ton of glyphs in it. I think it's something like 478. Got some of those digits. So some of these will, I think, become even more numerous because of the contextual alternatives. I'm not sure what the final count ends up being, but this means I've written 478 actual examples of characters. So this looks pretty good. This is after several hours of adjusting it in the Calligrapher web app and not knowing that you could click on neighboring characters to adjust their spacing in that spacing editor view. So if I were going to critique this, I would say it does look like my handwriting. I do recognize it. The word spacing is pretty good. The character spacing still seems a little awkward, like this word did. There's a little bit more spacing between the I and the following D than I'd like. The two Fs, again, I said I deleted the ligature. This is how I'd actually write them, so I do like that randomization effect. This looks much better than having the same F twice in a row. The word Ahab here looks a little bit wonky because the characters are both slanting different ways and the baseline isn't quite aligned. So those might need a little bit more work. But this is pretty close. And if you wanted to stop here, it'd be pretty good. This double T ligature is pretty conspicuous, so I might need to change that one. And then this ing again is really compact. So we see the word return and then suddenly it's crunched at the end. So most of font design, I imagine, is spent correcting these tiny spacing errors. Humans are very sensitive to spacing errors in their characters because that's how we read. So all these little spaces are hints about what the word is. And if something breaks the cadence of the spacing, it becomes obvious. Your eye kind of darts to it. Like this R looks really wide, and here it is again. So you kind of start seeing the errors, like the G and the H are close together. But this is pretty good. Again, Calligrapher lets you go pretty far. It's $8 for a month. You can get several months for cheaper, and I like it. It introduces you to sort of the basics of the considerations in making a font, and it provides a really convenient and fast way to get your handwriting into a font file. But let's go a little bit further and open FontForge. I just downloaded it today. Oops, it's no longer supported. So let's go back to the downloads. FontForge, I'm on the newest version of Linux Mint, which is based on the newest version of Ubuntu, and there's no package archive for FontForge yet, but I just downloaded the app image of it. So I saved a working copy of this font, but actually I'm going to open the unaltered version. I need to plug my laptop in. Start with the one that came straight out of Calligrapher, and then we'll see what we have to do to get a little bit better ligature support. Alright, well, it turns out that plugging in my USB dock completely killed my sound input. So we're back, it's day 2. Today we're going to talk about cleaning up this Calligrapher font in FontForge. So you can head over to the FontForge website, fontforge.org, to download FontForge for your machine. I'm on Linux Mint 20, which is a derivative of Ubuntu 20, and there's no official image of FontForge in the repository, so I just downloaded an app image from the FontForge website. Your results may vary, but just download one for your platform. And I also looked through this book, designwithfontforge.com. It's linked to from the FontForge website. I highly recommend taking a look at it to get started. It'll walk you through some basics, like from what is a font to taking artistic license, trusting your eyes and how the font looks, talking about the units of font design, and down here where we're currently looking, spacing, metrics, and kerning, which is what we're about to talk about. So take a look at this book, designwithfontforge.com. It's very helpful if you haven't used FontForge before. So let's get started. I downloaded my font. I went to Build Font. It produces a font file for you to download for your machine. And I'm working on the OTF version. You could also download the TTF version. I think for our purposes, they're basically interchangeable. So I ended up downloading the OTF one, but I don't think it matters. I'll show you where the download link comes up. Okay, so after you build the font, you can just select one of these files to download. Okay, so I downloaded the font and I put it in my .fonts directory, which is where fonts are typically stored on Ubuntu Flavor Linux, maybe others too. And I also downloaded the FontForge app image. So I'm going to start FontForge and we can take a look together at this font. So, like I said, I put the font in .fonts. Let's open it up. Okay, we're greeted with something quite similar to Calligrapher. Now we have a bunch of empty cells. You can see how sparse this encoding is. We only care about a few glyphs in the font, a few code points, and then a lot of this font is empty. So when we're looking at it, first thing we want to do is view the compact encoding. You can uncheck that to see the full encoding again, but we don't need to see all the empty cells. And you can see it's much more manageable now that we're only looking at the characters that are defined. You don't need that many characters to make a usable handwriting style font. Okay, so if you look through this FontForge, Design with FontForge book, in the spacing, metrics, and kerning section, we're here to fix the kerning. So the kerning is the space between pairs of characters. And if you read through here, you can see the common units, the definition of kerning, stuff like that, general principles. And this will walk you through things like, for example, showing you this optical illusion, where if we equally space H's and O's on a line, they'll look unequal. And so we have to mess with the kerning a little bit to make them look equal, even though these spaces are now unequal. And this has to do with the visual weight and the density of the characters. So this will walk you through how to get started. And it says you can open a metrics window for your font and then start editing the kerning. So I'm going to go into FontForge and let's try it out. So I went to metrics, new metrics window, and I'm going to type a phrase up here like testing. So we can see the font now. I have the grid turned on. By default, I don't think it's on. It might look like this. You can go to View, Show Grid, and Show. So we can see this looks pretty good, but the space between the E and the ST ligature is a little bit awkward. This looks like sting. And again, the ing is hovering over the baseline a little. We're not going to fix that right now, but we can fix it eventually. Right now, I just care about the spacing between these glyphs. And so, according to the manual, you can drag the grid lines between these character pairs, and it will adjust the spacing. And we can drag it over. And we can also see down here the names of the characters. So we have selective or contextual substitution number 2 for the T, E, ST ligature, and then the ing ligature. And I just tried to drag them, and this pop-up appeared. And when I first saw it, I was like, well, it says add a subtable to which lookup, and you can choose between horizontal kerning, in Latin lookup 0, or create a new lookup. And to answer this, we need to know what a subtable is and what a lookup is, and I didn't know either of those things, so I closed out of this. And it turns out that if you close out of it, it forgets your kerning settings. It resets them, and it'll keep asking you. So we're going to have to face the facts and learn what these things are in order to proceed. So I read through the Wikipedia page for TrueType font. TrueType is the ancestor of OpenType. They both rely on lookup tables to define things like character substitutions, like this substitute for a T, and spacing between character pairs. And if I edit this string, I'll show you what that substitution looks like. You already saw it on Calligrapher. Here's the default T. Down here you can see the name is T. If I type in E, suddenly we have the contextual substitute number 2 as defined by Calligrapher, and then an E. So things substitute. As you type ST, it becomes ST ligature. IN, the I became a substitute, and then G, the ING ligature. So that's cool to watch down here. You can see what glyphs are being filled in. And our goal is to adjust this kerning number, but when we try to edit it, it asks these two things. So it turns out that the font is based on lookup tables, and if we go to Element, Font Info, and then down to Lookups, we can see some of what they look like. So first is this G-sub lookup section. These are all different lookups for character substitutions. So we have the ligatures, and we can say, let's click in here and say Edit Data. So you can see that the source glyphs are A and N, then we get A in ligature. And then we have lowercase versions, stuff like that. So this is what's substituting the groups of characters for their ligatures. We also have this contextual alternatives lookup. And if we edit one of these subtables, we'll see that, let's take a look here. These are a bunch of chaining substitution rules. So when we have, I don't even know if I can read this. Let's click on one of these. It looks like any of these things, number sign, dollar, percent, ampersand, etc. Then apply the lookup single substitution lookup to. So I'm going to cancel this. We can go down here to single substitution lookup to, and let's look at this table. And you can see the replacement glyphs. So these contextual alternative lookups refer to tables of alternate characters, alternate glyphs, and that's how we get the variation in the font. And so this is for character substitution, and then we also have the position lookups, and here's the horizontal kerning lookup. So this is the one we actually care about. But if I edit this table's data, we'll see that the only thing defined as kerning pairs are space and all other characters. So FontForge is complaining because in order for us to define a rule for the spacing between, for example, this E and the ST ligature, we need to have the pair E and ST ligature in a lookup table. So let's make a new table for that. So I'm just going to go into this kerning. We're editing horizontal kerning right now. I'm going to say add subtable. Default name is fine. And you can either, now you have another choice. You can either kern individual pairs of characters, which I'm going to do now for simplicity, or you can use matrix of classes. And the classes are groups of characters that are similar, like capital F, capital T, capital gamma, things like that. So if you want to use kerning classes, you can edit entire groups of similar characters at the same time. And that way, for example, a lowercase I will tuck under a T or a capital F or something like that. For this font, my handwriting is messy enough that I'm going to use individual pairs and just adjust them by I. So I'm going to turn off auto kerning new entries because we're going to create a bunch of pairs right now, and I don't want it to try to figure out the automatic spacing between them. I actually just wanted to leave them as the default. And you can leave this enabled or not. This will prevent you, if you say only kern glyphs closer, that means you're not allowed to move them further apart. I'm not sure if this just governs the auto kerner or not. The typical understanding of kerning is that you're tucking the characters closer together. You're not usually moving them further apart. So I don't know if we care about this checkbox. I'd have to look at the manual, but I'm just going to leave that how it is. I'm going to click into this first table. So we're defining the first character of the pair and the second character of the pair. And if, for example, I just said exclamation and pound sign, that would mean we're going to create one pair between exclamation and pound sign. But I actually want to create a pair for every pair of characters. So I'll select in here and say edit, select all. And down here, edit, select all. And we turned off auto kerning, so this should be pretty quick. But if you leave auto kerning on, it'll go really slow while it's trying to automatically adjust all the characters. So now we have this new table. I guess it's hiding unused rows, even though there's not really an option to show them. I think we can just say OK though. So we just created this new table. And now we're going to try to move these characters, the E and the ST ligature, closer together. And FontForge should save the result in the kerning table. So I'm going to scooch this over. Great, now this looks a little bit more like my handwriting. You can see down here, it applied a negative 120 unit space adjustment between E and ST ligature. And negative values mean that the origin of the character, the second character in the pair, moved to the left. So it's tucking it closer to the preceding character. Depending on your font format or the metrics you have set up in your font, you might have a different number of units per M, like a capital M character's width. I think typical values are like 1,000 or 1,024. So this is probably about a 12% space adjustment. And I'm just doing it by eye, so I don't really care about the number here. You can use the arrow keys to move it over by one unit at a time, but dragging it is certainly convenient. So I also might recommend turning off the grid here, and that way we can see this at different sizes. Control mouse wheel zooms in and out, and we can adjust it until we like it. Okay, so now we're starting to adjust the finer details of the spacing. Let's check out another common ligature, like capital F followed by lowercase o. For centuries. Okay, so if we zoom out of this, kind of squint your eyes, there's some obvious weirdnesses in here. The F is all by himself, the OR is together. So we want to tuck these guys closer together. find the grid line between them and just scooch that over. Much better. And let's move this I over too. It can't get too close. My R's are really weird. I think this is partly just from writing them on the iPad, which has kind of a slippery screen. But again, your results may vary there. Try to write neatly if you want your font to look neat. Okay, so that's the basics of kerning. We're adjusting the horizontal spacing between pairs of characters. And the next logical step here is we want to make sure it looks right for everything that we might hope to type. So this is where it gets time consuming. And I imagine most of font design time is spent adjusting these spacings, fine-tuning them, making sure pairs of characters all look great together. So there's one more link I want to show you. It's linked to from this FontForge design book. It says a tool for generating such text, what they're referring to there is text that you can use to test your kerning, is available at String Maker by Nina Sturzinger. And if we go to String Maker here, this is a cool tool that lets you select a base for your spacing, your optical spacing adjustment. So I'm using lowercase nn, it's the default. These are sort of setting your calibration, if you will, like palette cleansers between characters that you're trying to adjust. And you can ask it to give you a string between, for example, a string that shows all uppercase letters next to all lowercase letters. And maybe you want the reverse as well, all lowercase letters next to all uppercase letters. And if you want, you can break it into lines of 50 characters. So if you click Make, it'll give you a text box full of strings like that. Okay, so I did this, and I saved it to a file called wordlist.txt. So if we go back in here, I'm going to open the font that I've already been working on. This was the OTF. When you save it, you get another, like a FontForge working file. So I'm not going to save this one. Don't worry, I have it saved. I'm going to open this again. And let's just work on the one that I already have going so you can see what it looks like. So I did exactly the steps that I just showed you, but I've already been in here adjusting some of the kerning. So you can see I've already adjusted the E and ST spacing so the E's little tail tucks into the bold S. And now we want to test it more rigorously. So I'm going to go up here to the drop down beside my test word and say load word list. And I'm going to load the word list that I just saved from the string generator. And now you'll see what we get when we combine a bunch of different characters in a line. So the way I'd use this is just scroll through. I've already done the adjustments for these first strings. Let's just click ahead a little bit. You can see all different themes of characters besides each other. And we're just scrolling until we see something that looks weird. So let's keep going a little bit. When you first start out, you might notice that a lot of these look wrong, but as you keep going, your kerning pairs will start fixing things. So it looked good up until here for my eye. I'm not being super critical right now, but this G followed by J, even though this is not going to be something I type very often, looks a little bit weird. So I'm going to tuck the J a little closer, maybe not quite that close. And this, again, this isn't a very important kerning pair because this doesn't really happen in English. Where is the edge of this J? Ah, it's over here. But that just reduces the space a little bit. Let's keep going. I'm going to zoom out a little. I'm not sure if there's a way to make this wrap. You can divide the strings, depending on the size you want to work at, you can divide the strings into different numbers of characters on that website. So this RN is a little weird, maybe like that. So this is basically it. There's not much more magic beyond this point. Like, this will make your font look so much better if you adjust the kerning. This is what I've been spending the majority of my time on. Again, I said I spent several hours on Calligrapher, just in multiple sittings, just working on the spacing on there. And the turnaround time between different iterations of the font, before you could see sample text like this, was a little bit longer because it makes you build the font and then you can try out test strings. But in FontForge, you can work with the kerning directly, see your results immediately, and upload a big corpus of test strings. And makes it a lot faster development cycle. So this line looks pretty compact. My handwriting actually looks like this. The letters are really close together. This line is looking promising. And this could take you as much time as you're willing to spend on it. Ooh, let's make this a little closer. I don't know when this would occur, but I think you can get arbitrarily picky with this step. But just play with it, have fun. If it looks wrong, you should probably adjust it a little. If it looks right, even if it's not perfectly spaced, or uniform, you can accept it. Like, this is more of an art than a science at this point. So I'm going to keep playing with these kerning pairs until this looks like my handwriting, and then hopefully I'll find a use for this font. Maybe I won't, but it was fun to make, fun to learn about. FontForge is really cool. It's a little bit hard to get started with because it involves some knowledge of the inner workings of fonts, but don't be afraid. Like, look up TrueType or OTF if you need to read a little bit about the working theory of the font internals. There are other good articles online about how those work. And again, check out the Design with FontForge book. It's very helpful. Cool, thanks for watching. Maybe you'll see this font on my website pretty soon.